This panel is about esports. Not a lot of people know exactly what esports is. They confuse gaming with esports, with competitive, with not competitive. It's not very clear. So just on a small note, if we can give a very straightforward definition on what esports is, I'm going to give it myself, correct me if I'm wrong. It's basically the competitive form of gaming. It's where teams get into leagues, get sponsored, and participate in a competitive environment. You want to add something to it?
I would just say it's a competitive gaming on a professional level.
So absolutely. Exactly. Professional and semi-pro level as well. So to start, just to have a global idea on what's happening today on the esports scene. A lot of people hear about esports. Can maybe Luciano, because part of Riot, one of the biggest publishers in the world, can you give us an idea on what's happening on esports globally and how the trend made it grow from the beginning when it started about 15 years ago to where it's become right now today?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like you mentioned, and Karim also mentioned, esports is competitive gaming on a professional level. It's also there, like you said, on a semi-professional level. Initially, you know, the concept and ideology behind esports was how can we celebrate players that are talented in a certain game the same way we would celebrate an athlete, and hence the controversy, is this a sports or is this not a sports? And you know, as technology grew, as social media grew, as this generation started shifting, the millennials, so on and so forth, that the behavior of how people are watching certain things changed with it. And esports was a perfect fit for it. I think there's no real right or wrong way of saying why esports became as big as it is. It's so many factors that actually came in together at the right time, right place, at the right generation, where people just sit behind their screens, mobile, whether it's on Twitch or YouTube, and watch and get entertained and aspire to be, you know, sitting on these big stages, so on and so forth. So it is a difficult question. How or why is it successful? It's just perfect timing, really. Everything came together at the right time.
All right, and would you say that these main events and the broadcasting aspect of this competitive play, similar to traditional sports, made it become what it is internationally, in the sense that more and more people would watch, thanks to, and the viewer experience was similar to any big traditional sports game around, like football or any other NBA or whatever, any other league. So would you say that I'm going to direct the question to Scott, the technology behind broadcasting these main events and these leagues and these players that are competing, did it evolve with time to get to a place where you adapt technologies of broadcasting specifically for esports?
Yeah, I think the main challenge right now for broadcasting these events is the signal conversion. You know, at these events, there are a lot more computers than cameras going into your traditional router. And these computers are rendering out something stupid like 120 frames per second with embedded audio. So we need to get that into a broadcast standard first for it to then fit into a production environment. The good news is, once the signal conversion is done, then you're back to traditional broadcast workflows, you know, video source to your router, cut with a switcher, and then off to the internet. And expression graphics just gets used exactly the same way it would be used on a traditional sporting coverage, yeah?
Yep.
All right, so then any normal viewers can enjoy it normally without having a headache of lags and stuff like that. It becomes very easy access.
Yeah.
So I'm going to step back a bit of the general idea about esports and just dig in a bit on the region here right now. Where are we? What's going on esports? I mean, there's a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of people that say it's booming, it's going to become a huge market, etc. But where are we really? I think Karim, it would be you're in it. You have a league. You've been doing this for a while. Can you give us a bit of of background on what's going on, how is it building, and what do we really have? Do we have something substantial that we can call esports in the region?
The answer is yes and no. I think we're in a very good place for esports right now. We're in a growth stage. I think many people looking in from the outside would look at the Middle East and think, you know, there's a lot of purchasing power, there's a lot of gamers, esports must be, you know, the next thing for the Middle East. And they're probably right. But there's a few steps to get there. So I think we're at a place where we have a number of successful events. The player base is growing. Society is starting to accept it slower and slowly. It's you know, becoming a professional or semi-professional player is starting to be culturally acceptable in certain countries, especially when big players travel abroad and come back. For example, a Lebanese player came back with, what was it, around $2 million after winning a prize. So when people start seeing that there is more than just sitting behind a couch and gaming, it becomes more culturally accepted. But where we are is we are in growth, but I think we're still not at a stage where we are compared to the rest of the world. We're not where Europe is, we're certainly not where North America is, or Asia. There's a lot of steps to be taken before we get there. And I think so far it's been a lot of hit and miss in our industry, because what we're seeing is a lot of new players are coming into the market, holding huge events very fast, and then not seeing the expected returns on these big events, and then leaving the market right away. So this has created a very negative effect for everybody involved, but overall the scene is in growth.
That's very interesting. So I'm gonna piggyback on what you're saying and link into our broadcasting and online platforms. Big events, we had big events in the past in the region. Like you said, maybe it was too big for what the market really can handle because of the community, because it's not really there yet. But digital platforms are going to be, I'm guessing, digital and broadcasting platforms are going to be the bridge for us, for our community and our viewers and our gamers to start enjoying more and more the sport. Maybe from Game 2 and Jinx, so if you guys can give us an idea on how do you see the region growing in terms of broadcast, and do you think there is the potential today, and what would be the potential in the future for the channels?
Well, before channels, I mean, yes, there's obviously potential and interest within the region at the moment, but there are still, as Karim has also mentioned, there are still some assets that needs improvement, in my humble opinion. First of all, we need more infrastructures. And apart from the technical infrastructures, I think we need more infrastructures that are dedicated to esports, as in stadiums, venues that are dedicated to esports, that in which events and tournaments will take place in. And yeah, consumer buying power might be there, but the internet penetration is quite low compared to other regions as well. Yeah. And the worst part is these cannot be simply overcome, these barriers cannot simply be overcome by partnering up with the right brands. We need right government investments to overcome these barriers. Yes, some of the, I mean, at the moment, some Middle Eastern players are leaving their marks on the field, but still, with the right community tournaments, it can be on digital platforms or linear TV channels. With the right community tournaments, I think we need to introduce more key players to the industry, more household names, more poster celebrities like Ninja or Faker. We have to introduce more players to the industry. And only then we will be able to bridge the gap between these gamers community, esports fans, and the brands, I think.
Fantastic. Mikhail, I believe Jinx is on OSN today in the region. Can you give us your insight? Do you have data on what's the viewing rate? How many people are actually enjoying the esports? Maybe do you have feedback from the community that they want more regional content rather than international? Do you enlighten us?
Obviously, we have viewing statistics, not so specific by operator, so OSN data are harder to get by for us. But overall, the channel internationally, we reach 50 million households and we have about 3 million viewers a month. So we're not a PowerPoint, right? We're a real physical channel that's attracting an audience. But here in the region, what I find really interesting is that because esports has become as big as it has, and there's so much noise, and we have panels like these on broadcasting conferences, You notice that, I am in conversations with a lot of companies here who are trying to find their way in esports.
Yeah.
And that sort of impetus that people are, and these companies vary from platforms to broadcasters, so you can see basically from multiple angles how people would like to engage with esports, but are somewhat uncertain on how to engage. And I think that's the sort of phase we're in. And I've seen experiments. I've seen NBC experimenting with ESL. I've seen things happening in the region which are positive and good. But I think there's much more to come of that. And from Jinx's perspective, I think we will hope to be working with our partner OSN to help them find their way in esports a bit more than they do today by just carrying our channel.
That's great. Edouard, I mean, Webedia is one of the largest companies that taps into so many different aspects of esports globally. You're here, you're in the region, you are focusing on esports in the region. How are we bridging all of this with the brands, with content, how are you guys creating that whole business model for you to grow?
So we look at esports at any other form of entertainment. I come myself from the world of sports, which is a very similar ecosystem with one major difference. When you look at the ecosystem, it's 5 different components. You have the players and the teams, obviously, the media broadcasting it, the talents / YouTubers, streamers who broadcast content online, the tournament event organizers, and last and most important, the game publishers.
Yeah.
And this is where the big difference is with the world of sports, is the game publishers, represented here by Luciano, are in full power in the sense that they own the sport. To fuel this whole ecosystem, like any other form of entertainment, you need money. The money is the fuel. Today, 80% of the revenue stream of esports are brand investment, namely sponsorship, advertising, buying media rights. So this is what we're trying to do as Webedia, is we cover 4 of these 5 touch points. We're not a game publisher, but we handle talents, we have media, we organize tournaments, and we handle teams and players. We try to fuel money in this ecosystem. In the region, historically, it's been difficult because of the lack of involvement of the main publishers. Now Riot has opened an office in Dubai, Tencent is coming. They are the key enablers to create this ecosystem, which will make it then a very appealing platform for brands to invest. As of today, this is why the ecosystem is still burgeoning, is that this involvement was not there yet. Something very big is happening in Saudi at the start of next month. Yes. And I think it will act as a boom for brands to finally understand what esports is about. It's really something that, you hear all these numbers, it's the trend, all the Gen Z are on Twitch and so on. Until you really see it, you attend an event, you don't realize how impactful it is. Just to give you a last example, I brought a client from Saudi last week in Paris, Paris Games Week, a big event we organized with Webedia. After 5 minutes in this conference, watching a tournament of Call of Duty, the guy was totally sold. He's like, okay, this is how it is. I heard so much about it, but once you see it, you just realize how these kids are crazy about it. It's not a fad.
For sure. I think you touched a very important point, which is the money in all of this. We know that we need, any industry and any ecosystem needs money to function. And it's very interesting today because our panel has several elements of this ecosystem. We have the channel broadcasters, we have the agency brand / the whole creative communication with bridging brands and the sport. We have the league, we have the publisher, we have the backend and the technical for all of this to happen. So I have a general question for everybody in the sense, where does the money come? How does this ecosystem work together? How does each element contribute and obviously receives the income out of this whole project? I mean, on a broadcasting platform, is it advertising? Is it subscription? Is it? Can you explain a little bit on how all this business model works?
Yeah. Well, I think we all agree here that the main revenue source of esports at the moment is sponsors and advertising. But, and there are many engaging models to esports at the moment. I mean, one can focus on broadcast rights, buy and sell the rights of certain tournaments to other streaming platforms, or one can simply invest in an esports team, or create and distribute exclusive tournaments. Or one can simply choose the pay TV option as SPI did with GameToon. So what we do is as part of Jinx, I believe, what we do is we offer a linear channel experience to the audience of certain platforms with full esports and gaming service to these audiences. And we generate our money through a fee per subscriber based model on a monthly basis from those platforms that we are involved in. So yeah, obviously we do, I mean, as for GameToon, we generate our money from pay TV business model. But obviously as we progress, we are looking forward to create and distribute our own exclusive tournaments as well in the future and generate some money out of selling advertising through there as well.
That makes total sense. Scott, from the back end, I mean, I'm guessing to be able to broadcast on these beautiful channels and have a seamless experience as a viewer, equipment is key, technology is key, there's a lot of R&D that gets put into it. Has this become a core line of business from in your company in general that traditionally?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we found, the business model really is mostly B2B at the moment. The main winners have been the production companies and the game developers themselves, because they are basically getting cheap advertising for their video games. If you think of an esports event as one long advert for the game being played, then you start to realize how effective this is. So let's say, for instance, Riot Games decides to spend, I don't know, $100 million on an esports event, and they only manage to get back, say, $75 million. That's still a big win for them, because they've only spent, what, $25 million on what effectively is an advertising campaign. The other winners are people like, I don't know, the tournament organizers, the game developers can also sell advertising, sponsorship, the same kind of thing you would with broadcast. And the other winners are the technology companies like ourselves. You know, these shows, these events require a lot of kit, and we are seeing a whole new market develop because of this. We've got you know, for instance, in the US, we have the Hyper Arena in Luxor Hotel, Las Vegas, the esports there, the esports arena. We have the esports stadium in Arlington. In Europe, we have ESL and DreamHack. ESL is now standardized on our expression graphics platform with about 30 licenses globally. In Asia, we have Banana Culture and VSPN. We just recently done a contract in Tokyo with Konami. We have Playtonia in India. So yeah, I mean, globally, it's becoming a big business for us. You know, definitely outside of broadcast, yeah.
That's great.
And I mean, one thing that is interesting about esports is the community of gamers in the ecosystem of esports. I mean, the community of gamers are the ones that decide whether a game is becoming an esport or not. And I've said this before, but like, broadcasters can learn from esports in one way, and I don't want to sound arrogant at all, but relentless focus on the community is something that broadcasters are not necessarily traditionally good at. But esports, that's where it came from. And you hear often quoted that there is, you know, a tournament prize of $25 million, and people forget that half of that money is actually generated from the gaming community itself. And so there is a big part that the participants themselves play in the whole value chain of esports.
Yeah, and maybe as a tournament organizer, I can also pitch in here regarding the revenue streams for esports. They're countless. I mean, I think so many were mentioned here. When you look at publishers, when you look at ads, when you look at brand sponsors, broadcasting plays a very important part in esports. I mean, since this is a broadcasting summit, I'd like to highlight that. I think if we weren't able to live stream or broadcast our tournaments live on air on different platforms, I don't think we'd be in business today. We started in 2015. I remember we set up our first tournament. We didn't have any sponsors at the time. We didn't have any brands. It was completely self-funded. And we thought, you know what, we're going to put on a great show. What we're going to do is we're going to self-fund this. We're going to stream it. And we set up a commentator panel. So back in 2015, this was probably the first commentator panel in esports. And we live streamed it onto Twitch. 5 years later, we're partnered with Activision, Ubisoft, EA, a number of endemic brands. It's all thanks to the value and the effort we put into our streams. Because what we were able to do was, we were able to take brands who were so invested in offline events. There was tons of money being spent on events that were being held in a corner of a hotel or underground in a network cafe that no one's ever heard of. So we were able to approach these brands and we were able to tell them, look, you're spending X amount in a venue, you've got, what, 100 players? Give me this X amount and I'll turn this into a regional event for you. You're going to have players and viewers from Egypt, from Jordan, from Lebanon, from the US, from the UK. And since then, this trend has picked up. And I think a focal part, I mean, I run a tournament organization, a tournament organizing company, but at the same time now we've branched out and set up a different company that's specialized and focuses purely on broadcast, on activations, on the elements surrounding the esports ecosystem. And we've also invested heavily in a studio, and I agree that setting up for esports is very different than setting up for your average broadcast. When you have 20 players sitting in one area, that's 20 computers, each with their own face cams, each with their own different frame rates. Sometimes they're playing different games. All of this is coming to a central point with different audio, different video every time you switch a camera. And it's a very, very complex but very awesome part of esports when you look at the broadcast. So it's a key enabler for every other revenue stream that exists. Because I think if we didn't have broadcasting in esports, many of these revenue streams would disappear.
Yeah.
You know, what's interesting about this is you've mentioned the ecosystem a couple of times, and you've mentioned how everything needs to come together, and I think this is the best example. So this is the ecosystem that needs to come together, whether it's the organizer, or whether it's the broadcast technical part, or the content, or the creative, or the publisher, and this is what is lacking in the region at the moment, and this is what needs to start happening for esports to get to where it is. For us as publishers, it's a little bit different how we make the money, basically. Putting esports aside, we make the money from our game. I mean, which it's obvious. But you mentioned something that is very, very important. It's the community. A player base, the community can either make or break your business. And the shift can happen overnight. It's unbelievable how powerful the players in the community are. I mean, with Riot Games, this is why we're always saying, you know, players value first, players experience first, and what differentiates League of Legends from any other game is every 2 Wednesdays you have an update, there's always something happening, so on and so forth. But what we find and what we do with the esports is, and you mentioned it, it's a great piece of advert. In reality, what better way for you to advertise your game and celebrate the talent of your players than building a massive stage with partnerships with like Louis Vuitton, the one that we did at Worlds a couple of days ago, and just celebrate them and do this massive tournament. You have to take care of your community. And once you have all these entities put together, the organizers, the brands, the partners, the broadcast, the proper technology, the content and creative, then you have a proper functioning ecosystem.
I think the key point is, and you mentioned that the community, the main part as well is the gamers themselves, the actual players, these guys that are going to spend hours and hours to train and to participate. And what people think is, but he plays this game anyway, why not compete? That's not true. The reality is that it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of concentration, it's a lot of time spent. I mean, it's a different world. So today, where do you think we are in terms of competitive gamers in the region? Do you think it will? Is it a big enough number? Is it going to grow? How do you foresee the short future?
I mean, it is going to grow. That's for sure. But is it in a healthy place right now? I personally don't think so. I mean, you look at a game like League of Legends. We have over 100 million players around the world. but there's only 2,000 professional players. In reality, where do you draw the line between the balance of, are we focusing on esports or are we really catering to all our players? The game has a system, a ranking system that differentiates between your casual player and your hardcore players and your professional players. The midline that differentiates someone that is really, really good, that is talented, there's 10% of the player base.
Yeah.
So is that something that you can really build your company on? I don't know. That's I mean, everyone has a different opinion, but you still need to cater to everyone. And by doing that, you grow the community, and eventually you hit a number where you say, okay, now that number is healthy for me to move on to the next step and potentially make a league or create a structure or bring proper partners, build an arena, so on and so forth. For me personally, I do not think this region is there yet. Is it going to get there? Yes, absolutely. But it's going to take a lot of effort.
Okay.
And apart from that, I think we are going to have to come up with new game genres as well. I mean, at the moment, the vast majority of the esports titles, I mean, the most popular one is League of Legends, and it's MOBA. It's quite, I mean, personally, I love playing and watching League of Legends, but most of the fresh starters, it might be a bit hard to master. So, as Eduardo also mentioned, I mean, if they want to pursue a career in this industry, game publishers might have to come up with new ideas out there that are a little less complicated to master and easy to understand also for the gamers and the audience as well.
Well, that's interesting. So the traditional complex games that are traditionally part of the esports, I'm going to say tier 1 or tier 2 games, in your opinion, publishers need to find new kind of games that would be more accessible for the larger public.
Exactly, and they have already done that. I mean,
we've done that. We've announced some games that are announced around. I mean, we've released Teamfight Tactics, which is a mod that is accessible to everyone. But we've also announced several games that are being in production right now. I don't think the keyword here is let's simplify it or make it easier. I mean, esports and casual gaming are two different things. It's like I can go with my friends on the weekend and play football. I'm not ever going to be a professional player because I don't have the talent, put the same amount of effort and hours in the day to get to that place. And in gaming, it's the same thing. Whether a game is super complex or it's super easy, you still need to put a lot of effort to become a professional player. I mean, you take Tetris. We've all played Tetris. Tetris. In Korea and in Japan, the professional scene is unbelievable. I went there on a trip and I played against a pro player. I went back home crying. I mean, I thought I don't even know the game. It's insane. So it's not about just how simple the game is. Yeah. It's how much effort are you willing to put into it, and how much is the publisher willing to help you grow that talent and take you to that next step.
But I want to add to that, saying for broadcasters, mainstream broadcasters to engage with esports, game choice is quite important. And if you look at NBC Universal's Open in the States, I think that was Rocket League. Rocket League is football with cars. Mm-hmm. So they kind of reasoned with Faceit, the tournament organizer, that hey, football with cars is a concept that people will understand. Let's take people by the hand and go there first, because it's easy and accessible. Nippon TV in Japan went into esports by buying a team and creating a team structure. Turner created E-League, created their own league, and then was very, very open-minded about putting all that content out online first, and not just a tiny little bit on TV. So they got the sort of mindset of esports. So I think game choice is really important. I think League is, of course, the biggest game of all. But for a first step, maybe a game like Rocket League would be an easier and more accessible way for people to engage.
Yep.
I
taking a step back to what we were discussing in terms of the financials and the brands, the sponsors' involvement. Who do you think, so traditionally in esports, it's peripheral brands, tech brands, gears, and stuff like that used to traditionally sponsor these events. Now there's a shift, some F&B brands, some fast food chains, some DHL, for instance, some courier brands. In our region today, who do you think who will lead the way? Who do you think will tackle the esports formula in the sense and say, okay, I want to tap in the generation Z. I want to target these people. I know that gaming and esports is super interesting for them. Let's put money. Let's start putting our money where our mouth is. I think maybe Edouard, you can give us a general idea on who are the brands that are approaching you wanting to tackle this aspect.
So obviously we differentiate two types of brands, clients. You have the endemic, so basically the game publishers and let's say the hardware providers. It's a natural audience for them, and historically they've been investing in gaming and esports. They need to, like Luciano was saying, the end game for publishers to sell more games. And esports is, in a way, a marketing stunt for publishers to sell more games. And then the non-endemics, it's a bit counterintuitive, but here in the region, they have a lot of appetite for esports.
Yeah.
Why? First, esports has the advantage versus gaming to carry premium values. Esports, it's about, it's like sports. It's team spirit, focus, strategy, nutrition. It carries values that are not present in gaming. For the gaming image we have is the potato couch, drinking Coke and eating chips. Esports take you out of this slump of gaming. So for non-endemic brands, it becomes a very interesting proposition. And then, the speech sells very well, but it's very obvious. It's a way to reach the unreachables. It's these kids, Gen Z, they don't respond well to traditional advertising. They have their own communities, their own platforms. They use ad blocking on internet. They don't watch linear TV. So then you tell them you're going to talk to these kids in their natural environment in a way which is non-intrusive, which is enabling their passion. The current brands we're talking to, you have obviously the telcos, the banks, the fast food or quick food chains, car makers a bit. These are your typical non-endemics who are investing in esports, and lately more and more, as the Louis Vuitton example, luxury brands, Hugo Boss, Mercedes as a car maker, but high-end car maker, they're investing a lot in esports. So it's really the span of brands working on esports now is extremely wide.
So in your opinion, our region is not going to follow what happened globally with the history of esports and how it grew, but you think the shift will be much quicker, where non-endemic brands will lead the way for our esports market to grow?
I think Karim has been in the market for longer than we've been, but initially you start this with the endemic brands, like
Yes.
you've been working, I'm sure, with the smaller brands. But today, these guys are first way more aware and have way smaller budgets. So there's so much you can do with the budget they have versus, I don't know, a Saudi bank. They would be way more willing to invest more than a brand like Logitech. They have their consumer base and they don't really need to invest that much money.
Just to add to that, I think one of the common issues that we face here in the region, and not just as publishers, but also as organizers, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there is a lack of education around not just esports itself, but the gaming industry overall. I mean, the gaming industry is a massive thing. You're talking technology, distribution, retails, partnerships, so on and so forth. Esports is just a small little portion in the whole ecosystem, really. But that lack of education with the non-endemic brands is what we need to focus on. Yeah. We need to help them understand what it is, what are the opportunities around it, how do you grow it, how do you target it, what do you get out of it, before we actually come to them and say, hey, can we have $5 million? We want to make it. You know what I mean? It's like any other. It's an industry that's growing, and we just need to show them the power of gaming and what it actually does. And I think hopefully when we do our event in Saudi Arabia in the next 2-3 weeks, we will be able to kind of showcase to other publishers and to the region, like It's actually doable.
Well,
And maybe I can add to that because it's a very good point. So there is a wave of awareness that's in our region now. Non-endemics are starting to jump on board. Everybody wants a piece of esports, esports, esports. But again, a very good point that was mentioned was that the numbers in esports are still not there in the region. I mean, if I was to look at our tournaments, even in our participants, the player base that register, you could say that almost 10% are considered semi-professional or professional players. The other 90% are casual gamers, are people who want to try the game, who are attracted to maybe a previous stream and said, all right, let's set up a team, let's give this a shot. So the esports approach, we have to be very careful about it, because if I was to go to a non-endemic and tell them, you know, there's this thing called esports that's happening in the Middle East, and you're going to get so much of it, and you're going to have all these crazy numbers, I wouldn't be giving the full picture. So I think there is a big education responsibility on all of us involved. We all need to be very transparent with the numbers. Esports is still not there, but what that's created is it's created a beautiful garden where there's a lot of elements of gaming in there. So, for example, in September, we had a Fortnite tournament. And what we did was we flew in 6 streamers who were popular streamers on YouTube. We flew them into Dubai. We set them up in a studio. They were each playing on their own game. Then we gave them mini challenges between each other. And they were reacting on camera. We were catching all the reactions, streaming that online. People were able to chat. And this created an insane amount of engagement, maybe more so than some of our esports tournaments. So there's a beautiful balance in there. Maybe the discussion shouldn't be fully on esports, but also what this funding in esports has created, which is a ripple effect into the surrounding events and tournaments in this case.
That's great. We're gonna end on that note. From the audience, if anybody don't know what we're talking about in terms of content for esports, I think Ross videos have a stand. They have cool content images they can show.